Hello, this is William from Visual Components. In this video, I'm going to show you how to select objects in the 3D world. Now, the context of your workspace determines what objects in the 3D world you can select. For example, right now I'm using the Home tab so I can select components in the 3D world, but if I click the Drawing tab, I can now see the Drawing world and I can select drawings, templates, annotations, and dimensions. If I click the Program tab, the context is now robot programming, so I can select a robot, robot positions, or statements in the robot's program. I can also select robot data such as base and tool frames. If I change the tab to modeling, I'm now working with components, so I can select component data. For example, I can select features, geometry in a component, nodes or links, properties, and behaviors. Now, to get started, I'm first going to teach you the basics of directly selecting objects. And to do that, we'll go back to the Home tab to work with components. Now, if you want to directly select a component in the 3D world, just point to that component and click it. Simple as that. Notice that when you select a component, it's highlighted blue, and when you directly select a component, you'll have this mini toolbar displayed briefly in the 3D world that provides one-click access to commands. So we can see we can clone the component, delete the component, interact with the component, and so on. Now, if you want to add a component to the current selection, hold down the Control key and then click that component. So here I click the cube, it's now selected, and it's also part of the current selection. I can do the same for the box as well. Now, if you want to remove a component from the current selection, just hold down the Control key and then click the selected component. So I'll click the box here. Notice it's no longer highlighted blue, so it's not in the current selection, and I can do the same for the cube. Now, if you want to select components in an area, you can use an area selection tool. To do that, go to the manipulation group, click the select command here, and this turns on select mode in the 3D world, so you're only selecting objects in the 3D world. You can't move them around or anything. Click this drop down arrow here, and notice you have two commands. We have a rectangular selection and a freeform selection. So I'll click rectangular selection, and this allows me to drag the pointer in the 3D world to create a selection box. So any component that is within that area will be selected. So notice no component was in my selection box, so currently I have nothing selected. I can directly select the robot again and click an empty space in the 3D world, and notice it clears my selection. But if I now draw a selection box over this palette, the palette is now selected. And let's actually change my view a bit and select all three of these components here. I actually selected the robot, so let's do that again, and there you go. Now for the freeform selection, this allows you to draw a selection path. So let's go back to manipulation group, click the drop down arrow for select, click freeform selection. Notice I can now drag the pointer to draw a selection path, and when I let go of the left mouse button, this actually closes this loop and any component that was in that area will be selected. So if I actually just draw a loop around this cylinder, notice that the robot and the cylinder is selected. So actually let's draw around the box, and there you go. Let's actually change our view to top down menu so we can better see everything. And let's just be tricky and select that cylinder. There you go. Now, if you want to indirectly select components, you have a couple options. So if you want to select everything in the 3D world really quickly, just hold down the Control key and the A key, or press them, and now I have everything selected in the 3D world. That command is also available in the Select drop-down menu. So if I go back to Manipulation Group, click the drop-down menu, there's that Select All command. Now, if you want to invert your selection, meaning select everything that is not selected right now in the 3D world, you can do that using this command called Invert Selection. So notice I have everything selected in the 3D world, so if I click Invert Selection, nothing is selected. But if I select a component, for example this palette, then use the Invert Selection command, notice that it selects all other components that were in that current selection. So it has the robot, the cube, the box, the cylinder, and the tool. Now, another way to select components is to use a list or a panel. In this case, we're working with components in a layout, so I'll go over here to the cell graph panel, and notice that components are listed by name under categories. And notice that if I select a category, I'm selecting all components that are listed in that category. So I click products and containers, so the cube, the palette, the box, and the part are now selected in the 3D world. If I directly select one of these items, I'm directly selecting that component. So I selected the cube. If I hold down the Control key and click Euro palette, I now have both of those components selected. If I hold down the Control key and click cube, I remove it from the current selection, and now just the palette is selected. So this might be overwhelming so far, but this is the basic skills for selecting objects. Now, if you want to change the category a component is listed here in the cell graph panel, just go over here to the component properties panel, and notice that every component has a property called category, and this defines what category the component is listed in the cell graph panel. So let's actually change products and containers to example. Press the Enter key, And notice that the change is now updated in the cell graph panel. So here's that example category here. And the change was just for the Euro palette. So if I select example, the palette's selected. But if I select products and containers, only the cube, part, and box are selected. And another thing to make mention of is that when you have multiple components selected in the 3D world, notice over here in the component properties panel, it shows you how many objects are selected, and the common properties of the selected objects are also listed here. Now, some properties must have unique values, so notice name here has this multiple values indication here, so you actually can't edit this property. But some of the properties are similar, so you can edit them. So notice this bomb property here, I can turn it off and turn it on. I can also change the category property. So for the cube, part, and box, let's change its category to be example 2. And that changes the category property for all the selected components I have. And if I go over here to the cell graph panel, notice there's that category of example 2. I can select the part or select the category to select all those components. Now that we have the basics of selecting objects in the 3D world, we can go on to different contexts. So let's go to the drawing tab. And let's now select some objects in the drawing world. Now to do this, you need to directly select them. So I'll click this drawing here to select it. I'll click this annotation to select the annotation. And I'll click this dimension to select the dimension. I can hold down the Control key to select multiple objects. Or I can press Control key and the A key to select everything in the drawing world. Now we don't use area selection by default in the drawing world because you're dealing with a lot of detail here. But if you want to have that command available for you, what you can do, just go back to the Home tab. And in the manipulation group, just click this drop down menu here. And if you want the rectangular selection, just point to the item in the drop down menu, right click, and then click this command here called Add to Quick Access Toolbar. So notice that command is now listed here in the Quick Access Toolbar. If you go back to the drawing tab and turn on that rectangular selection command, notice I can now draw a selection area and it selects all those objects. But this can be quite tricky, so I don't recommend using it. So I actually will go back to my Quick Access Toolbar, right click the select command, and remove it. Let's now see how this works in robot programming. So I'll go here and click the Program tab. And now to select a robot in the 3D world, you need to use the jog command. And you need to directly select the robot. So just point at it and click. Now when you select the robot, its program will be displayed in the program editor, and its configuration will be displayed in the jog panel. Now by default, you can directly select robot positions in the 3D world, and if you can't see them for the selected robot, just go here to the 3D world toolbar, and under frame types, click that arrow. Make sure that this checkbox is selected for robot positions, and just make sure that it's highlighted here to turn on the global visibility for the robot positions. So you can see them here, 0.6 and 0.4. Now if you want to directly select a robot position in the 3D world, you can use the select command. So I'll go here and directly select P6. But now if I want to use an area selection to select robot positions, you notice I can drag the mouse to create a selection area, and notice it selects robot positions, not the palette. In this case, the context is robot programming, so you're directly selecting or area selecting robot positions. Whereas in the Home tab, you're area selecting or directly selecting components. So remember that in the future. Now, if you want to select robot positions or statements from a list, just go here to the program editor. Notice you can select a routine in the robot program, or you also can select the statements that are in that routine. So notice I'm selecting this statement here called P3. This is a motion type statement, so I'm also selecting the robot position for this statement in the 3D world, which you can see highlighted here. Likewise, I can select this other statement for a set binary output statement, and I can see its properties listed here in the statement properties panel. I can also select multiple statements, so if I actually hold down the Control key and click these other statements, notice I'm adding them to the current selection, and it shows here in the statement properties panel that I have 4 objects selected. They don't really have any common properties, so I'm just seeing the coordinates for the motion statements I have selected. If I want to remove these statements from my current selection, just hold down the Control key and click the item, and now it's removed in the selection. So it's basically the same task, just a different context. Now if you want to select robot data, go ahead and use the jog command, select the robot, and go here to the jog command, the jog panel, excuse me. Now when you want to select a base frame in a robot, just set the base property to the base frame you want to select, and then click this gear icon here. Notice the tooltip says select. I click that, and now I have base 1 selected in the 3D world. Now I probably can't see it, but I have the manipulator shows me where it is in the 3D world. So I'll go here to the frame types arrow and turn on robot bases, and notice, yep, there they are. Let's go ahead and turn on robot tools as well. You can notice there's the tools. And the base properties panel here, you can use this drop down menu for the base's name. to select other bases and other tools. So I'll click Tool 1 here, and now I have Tool 1 frame in the robot selected in the 3D world. Now if you just want to select the tool frame itself, you can just go back to the jog panel, set the tool property to what tool you want to select, and then click this gear icon to select it in the 3D world. Now let's see how this works when you're modeling a component. So if you're an Essentials with Modeling Pack user, I didn't forget about you. Let's go to the Modeling tab. And what we can do in the 3D world is directly select features in a component. And notice I said just one component. So if I point to this part of the robot and click, I've now selected the feature and its geometry is highlighted green in the 3D world. If I hold down the Control key and click another part of the robot, I'm now adding that feature and its geometry to the current selection. If I hold down the Control key and click a selected feature, I'm removing that feature from the current selection. Let's see how this works for area selection. So I'll go to the manipulation group, click the select drop-down menu, and let's use rectangular selection. So now in the 3D world, if I drag the pointer to make a selection box, let go of the mouse button, I'm now selected multiple features in the component that were within that area. But if I make a selection box around multiple components, notice what happens. It only selects features in one component, in this case the Euro palette. But if I select different parts of the same component, I can select multiple features in that component. And another thing to notice is that when you have a feature selected in the 3D world, in the component graph panel, the node of that feature will be selected for you here, or indicated, and the feature is listed here in the node feature tree. Now since I have features selected in different nodes, it's kind of hard to tell what we're working with. So if I actually go back to the 3D world and click this part of the robot, you can see this feature and its geometry is contained in this axis 4 node, and the feature is listed here and selected for me. Now what I can do to select multiple features using a list is I can hold on the Control key, and I can select this feature here, and notice its geometry is highlighted in the 3D world. And now if I select an operation type feature, in this case a transform feature, let's see scale logo, it really doesn't show up anything in the 3D world. So let's actually select this transform feature here, and notice that the geometry or features that are affected by this operation, their geometry is highlighted a different color in the 3D world, and you can see them highlighted here in the robot. Now if you want to select a node or a link in a component, you have to select that from the component graph panel. So notice here I see the links of the component. I can select the root node, and this selects the component. So if you notice the context of the properties panel, you're seeing the component properties. But if I select a link, in this case axis 1, notice that I selected that link. The node or the features of that node are highlighted blue in the 3D world, and the geometry of child nodes are highlighted a different color, this light purple. Notice here's the node's properties, so properties for the link and the joint properties of that node. I can also select multiple nodes, so I'll go back to the component graph panel, hold down the Control key, and now I have axis 1 and axis 2 nodes selected. You notice here you have two objects selected that are links, and there's their joint properties. Now if you want to select behaviors or properties of a component, go back here to the component graph panel and turn on this selection box for behaviors to show behaviors collections in all the nodes of a component, and select the properties checkbox here to display the properties underneath the root node of the component. So if I expand the properties collection here, we can see the properties, and I have to select them from this list here. So I selected this first property, and here are its attributes that are displayed in this property task pane. If I hold down the Control key, I can select multiple properties, and if I hold down the Control key, I can remove properties from the current selection. Likewise for a behavior, I just have to expand a behaviors collection that's within a node and directly click the listed behavior in the component graph panel, and here you can see its properties. Now if I select multiple behaviors, behaviors have a lot of different properties, so you won't really see much when you have multiple behaviors selected. The last thing I want to talk about before ending the video is how to use snap type commands. And to know what I'm talking about, let's actually go back to the Home tab and work with components. Now the easiest way to learn snap types, I feel, is to use the measure tool. So I'll go here to the tools group and click measure, and now notice here in the measure task pane there's a section called snap type, and this defines what type of points or locations in the 3D world you can select. So notice here if I click edge, I can select a point along an edge of geometry. Notice here in the palette, click that edge, the midpoint, or just a corner point of the edge, like so. If I use a snap type of face, I can pick a point along a face, like so, or actually can snap to a face center. Now if I want to use edge and face, this allows me to select edges and faces, so I can select this corner point here and that face center. If I want to select a free point in the 3D world, this is a bit different, so notice here I can select the corner point here of the box, and any arbitrary point where the cursor is in the 3D world. Wouldn't really recommend using that, but you can if you want to. Let's now use origin. So this allows you to select the origin of a component or a node. So I'll select the palette here to make that measurement. But let's actually select the root origin of the robot and go up here to this node. Notice you can see its origin or its offset, and there's an origin for that node as well, and there's the measurement. Now for bound box, you're selecting corner points of the bound box or the volume space of the component. So let's go here to this box. Notice I can select this lower corner point of the bound box and that upper corner point. For the robot, you notice we're working with the node, so the bound box then encases the geometry of that node. So there's one corner point there, and for the tool there's one corner point there of the bound box. Now the snap types will depend on the context, so let's actually go to the Program tab. That's primarily where you'll be using the snap types. Let's now go ahead and configure the robot, so I'll use the jog command to select the robot. And in the jog panel, let's use base 1 and tool 1. And notice here we have snap options, so we can snap to an edge, and face. A frame, what's that? Well, let's use that. Notice I can now snap to a frame or coordinate system in the 3D world. So that could be a base frame or a tool frame in another component, or it could just be a frame feature. So I'll go here to the 3D world toolbar and select frame features. Notice the palette has a frame called mount frame. So let's now use the snap command. Notice I can now snap directly to that mount frame. Now this is unreachable via the robot, so the robot obviously won't go there, but that's how that snap type works, frame. You're selecting types of frames in the 3D world. Now for origin, it's the same thing. You're selecting the origin of a component or its nodes. You're selecting the bound box that encases the geometry of a node. And for bisector, this is interesting. What you actually can do is you can select the where the point or the seam where edges meet. So notice that this face here and this other face in the cube, they kind of intersect at this point here, so I actually can snap to that bisecting line there, like so. Now I covered a lot of information, so I do recommend you rewatch the video or go to the help file, getting started section to learn more about what you can select in the 3D world. And if you have any questions, please feel free to visit our forum at forum.visualcomponents.com. And as always, have a great day.